I forget what to look at here.
A superstar.
Famous.
All right, well, so we ready?
We're only an episode in.
And we're back.
Woohoo!
This time we are joined with a very special guest. But before we get to our special guest, just as a recap, I'm Jorie Munroe. And I'm an inbound professor here with HubSpot Academy. And I am joined by my co-host, also co-founder of the Inbound Reporting Framework.
Hi guys, my name is Nakul Kadaba.
We are joined today by a very special guest, and I will let her do all the introductions.
Oh, well, thank you very much. My name is Adriti Gulati. I am an inbound professor on the Academy with Jorie, and I focus on Service Hub.
Awesome. So as you may or may not know, this is our second episode of really diving into what makes an inbound reporter successful. What are the behaviors that someone needs to kind of lay down, get in place before their reporting strategy can be effective, especially when we think about this new kind of business model of the flywheel. Like, how do these pieces move together so that by the time you're looking for that one specific report to answer your question, you are set up for success from the get-go?
Yep.
So just to kind of recap some of what we covered in last episode, Nakul and I kind of came together this year to start to identify why users of HubSpot reporting tools were really hitting those kind of points of friction and those pain points. And what we discovered is there are 4 fundamental behaviors that someone needs to kind of lay down and have in place in order to really drive success with their reporting tools.
Yep. So those 4 behaviors were they're implemented inbound at every layer of the business, right? They had a shared sense of goals throughout their company. They used HubSpot to store and manage their data, and then they strategically visualized their reportings consistently.
So how that translates into actions is the first one, you need to map your flywheel.
Yep. Which is the first step of the framework. The other 3 being defining your goals, managing your data, and visualizing your data.
That's what this podcast is really all about, is really diving into each one, sort of unpacking these big concepts and trying to make them kind of more actionable, consumable, because again, they are kind of all working together and important to the long-term success of your business, but also just kind of when you're interacting with your data.
And we also had, so the last episode we really talked about what is that flywheel?
Yeah, like what is a flywheel?
What is it? And Kyle really went into the actual physics with us.
Newton came up.
Yeah, Newton came up.
We were like, all right, we're just here to talk about data.
We heard Newton, Isaac Newton.
Kyle.
Yeah, thanks
so
for
you
that.
have that as a tee up.
And so he really took it apart. But more importantly, I think he also went to identify, great, you have this structure that you say it's a flywheel. It's not necessarily set in stone. It can change, right? It can be different than just saying attract, engage, and delight. It doesn't necessarily have to be all 3 of those. It can be more stages of those.
Right.
The key things are that you have to identify what's pushing your flywheel forward.
Your force.
Your force. What is restricting the movement of your flywheel.
Which is your friction.
Which is your friction, right? We talked about a couple of examples. We talked about a couple of conceptual analogies to think about how to relate the flywheel to eventually your reporting strategy. And hence the framework.
Definitely, and if you haven't given it a listen, definitely check it out. I think what's important here is we're going to start building on some of those concepts, especially as we get into what Adriti's really the thought leader of our team on HubSpot Academy. It kind of builds off those key concepts of like what is a flywheel, what's working, what's not for your business.
Yep.
How are you starting to think about who you're interacting with. That kind of came up in terms of an example we were using.
Yep.
So if you haven't checked that out, totally go do it. But without further ado, we are on to Mapping Your Flywheel Chapter 2.
Woohoo!
Awesome. So let's start by introducing Adriti. So you are working, as we kind of had mentioned in the last episode, HubSpot Academy is working on this course. And it's really to start to unpack like how you can start to implement in action different areas of the flywheel. And Adriti, can you talk to us about some of the kind of learning content lessons that are already live in the Learning Center and how this has kind of led you to be an expert on this one specific thing, that thing being customer journey mapping. Like where does this kind of fall into your area?
So working on Service Hub, my main persona is service agents, right? And everything that I've researched talks about the customer experience and how it's really the service agents who are talking to the customers most often. So it's their job to influence the customer experience.
Totally.
But as we're talking more about a flywheel, we are putting the customer in the center of everything we do. That concept of just having service agents as the customer's main point of contact always is not true anymore.
Right.
Instead, it's everyone's job to create a great customer experience, especially everyone who's touching those customers.
Definitely. And how does this like really start to factor into this idea of customer journey mapping? Can you walk me through kind of what customer journey mapping is and how people should start thinking about it?
Yeah, so just definition, a customer journey map is a visual representation of the end-to-end experience a customer goes through.
Right.
And it's I think when a lot of people think about how they interact with customers, it's in touch points. So sales will be like, oh, yep, I had 3 calls with them. That was my customer experience. But that's not true. When you like go to, talk to someone or talk to a company, you're not thinking about it and like, okay, I talked to the salespeople, talk to the customer service people. It's all one, right?
It's almost like one big conversation you're having.
It's a series of touch points, right?
Yeah.
And you can have a great few touch points, but an awful customer journey or customer experience, and vice versa too. So I think one, it's really important to know that the customer journey is your end-to-end experience. It's not just your marketing, sales, and service.
So it's really a good way to start to break out of this kind of siloed thinking, if you will. That is kind of like the dinosaur fossil of the funnel business model,
Yeah, a lot of paleontology being used there. Like, jeez. Yeah.
The Tyrannosaurus of the, but yeah, the fossil fuel. Anyway, okay, I'll stop. So it's this way to start to see how that, to really step into your customer's shoes and see how that experience can, reflect.
Figure out what the points of force and friction are in the actual experience.
I think it's also important to think about like there might be holes that you don't know.
For sure.
You don't know how the customer experience is going.
I'm going to do a shameless plug for both of you guys because I know that a couple of weeks ago, you both were on a really nice webinar talking about customer journey mapping. And you went through this really great exercise of actually going through an example and actually showing what do our customers think, feel, and do, with regards to the buyer's journey. Is that customer journey mapping, is it an extension of what you would do to figure out your buyer persona? How is it different? How would you distinguish it and apply it to the flywheel? And mapping your flywheel.
Sure. So I think to answer the first part of the question, like how it relates to buyer persona.
Yep.
Customer journey mapping comes after the buyer persona. So the first step in creating a customer journey map is to set the stage. And by setting the stage, you need to get people from all different departments in a room. You need to make sure that everyone's aligned with the goals of the customer. What is your company's mission? What are you helping people do? And third, you need to make sure that you are all working off of the same buyer persona.
Right.
So if I have to say it, I would say one buyer persona per map. So people can go through different experiences, and that's important to map out. But having said that, the map is going to tell you more and more about your buyer persona, especially as you dig into the research, talk to more folks, and map out the thinking, feeling, and doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sense I got when you two were on the webinar doing it, right? And we'll link to it, on the blog post, summarizing this episode, just so like people can get an idea.
Yeah.
Because it became a lot more clear for me of just saying, what is customer journey mapping? How is it different from this? Clearly, we already know because she just said it. But more so, you can actually see it visualized of saying, oh, great, I'm going to think, feel, do.
Yeah.
For awareness stage, consideration stage, decision stage, customer, right?
Yep.
For buyer persona A, buyer persona B, buyer
Right.
persona C, as you're saying, one part. And talk about it, how it fits into that flywheel, because the last time we were talking about just mapping the flywheel, just identifying
What
it,
the flywheel is,
recognizing what it is
Yeah.
overall. We've got some familiarity now. We're trying to figure it out and connect it with our reporting strategy. How does customer journey mapping help with that?
Yeah. So I think it probably helps in two big ways. One is those handoffs, or the intersections between
Those pointy bits.
the chevrons. Are we using chevrons or no?
We have not introduced the
We have
concept
not,
of
but
chevrons.
we were
That's-
going to bring it up, so it's fine.
Okay, good.
It's totally fine.
But I'll do it. So much like like a flywheel is like an actual like physics term, chevrons like the technical term for those pointy handoff bits. So vocab lesson of the day.
Yes.
Brought to you by Jorie.
Right.
Thank you.
But oftentimes what we're really talking about is kind of those handoffs between the different teams. But they're kind of visualized as like triangles on the actual flywheel.
Right.
Yeah, so I think a customer, like the essence of the flywheel are those intersections. It's a circle, right? And I think the customer journey map is going to show you in real life how those intersections happen. So how does someone go from, having a marketing point of contact to a sales point of contact?
Yep.
Right.
And I think so many folks, especially on services team, will tell you these intersections are the
Yep.
hardest part, like sales and service. Like, what did sales promise that I need to
Yeah.
deliver on? Like, what are these things? And I think by mapping that out and showing you, this is a point of friction. Like,
Yep.
no one is talking. No one is telling me what I need to do as a service agent to make sure that these folks are seeing success. So I think
Yeah, right.
one,
Right.
it's like really honing in on those handoffs, which are anyway just naturally going to be a little point of friction, since points of contacts are moving from one hand to the other. And also just your force, right? Like, what's working really well, what's not. If you don't know, like, something that's going on, as you mentioned earlier, is that a point for feedback? Like, how can we even extend on that?
I think she talked to Kyle right before walking in here, because
That was like
That's
very
literally
excited.
what he said, the exact same thing. It was
Yeah.
like, that's great. So, because we talked a lot about the handoffs, as points of, maybe that's a particular metric,
Yeah.
to think about when you're thinking about a business goal.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the whole point of the business. Maybe that's the business goal period.
Yeah.
If it's the end of that, or that last handoff of how many customers you close, or how much revenue you generate.
It is interesting to think about how like your tools then factor in, because something that you mentioned is like surveys. So when thinking about kind of the different handoffs in certain tools, what are some examples of, if you're noticing like an issue between sales and service, or service to marketing?
Sure.
Some tools that can kind of help them fill that gaps, because it's good to identify the gaps, but then what do you do
Right.
once you know where the gaps are?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that you can do. One, going back to your point about goals, is align your marketing and sales, or sales and service teams, around common goals. So I think
Great.
that, like at HubSpot, sales and service folks are both measured on revenue retention.
Right.
When you have the same goals, there's going to be alignment. It's not like a us versus them mentality. It's like
Yeah,
we're all
yeah.
here for the customer.
Yep.
And
Shared goals is a good one, I think, and something that kind of goes back to the way that we sort of touched on this in the last episode, but we'll definitely touch on this in the future episode, where it's like there has to be that shared sense of goals.
Yep.
There has to be that alignment, because much like, so you can experiment in your marketing team, your sales team, your services team on how to make your processes more effective, but if they're not talking to each other, like those experiments, those efficiencies,
Yeah.
then they are going to continue to be siloed. So you could have the best well-oiled marketing or service or even sales machine, but if they're not also working in conjunction with each other, then you're not going to be as effective as you can. So I think
it
starting-
adds more evidence to the flywheel model.
Definitely.
Of just saying, and something that Kyle had mentioned last episode was that, you could have, all of these made in funnels, but you cannot necessarily just say, well, great, I've just handed off some qualified leads to Jorie, who's in sales, so thanks a lot. That
Yeah.
was me wiping my hands clean.
Right.
For
Sound effect.
yeah, sound effect. But but Kyle had mentioned that, right? Like where you can't just necessarily think like that anymore.
Yeah.
You will have a common set of goals, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You will have a particular metric that maybe your team is held to. And as you were saying, the customer journey mapping kind of help you identify those forces and friction to say like, oh, it looks like that they're having trouble in this part of the process, whether it's marketing, sales, service, or any other teams that we can't think of.
Totally. So you recently, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just also going to say, not a shameless plug, but a CRM. Like something that everyone is connected to and all in one platform. Like in a big company, like in a small company, you can maybe go up and talk to someone if you know them. But in a bigger company, like how are you expected to do that? Having just one source of truth, and that's CRM.
Yeah, like one centralized place where you're putting your data. So
Yeah.
you can understand how the interaction.
Coming soon on inbound reporting.
Definitely.
No, but it's true. I mean, it varies between the customers. You can see that, at least the ones I talk to, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I know that you just released a lesson on this.
Oh, just released so many.
Oh, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, right.
Adriti is out here just popping out lessons. So, can you talk to us a little bit about the lesson that you just released about, specifically, I believe it was about the sales to service handoff and kind of any insight that you saw particularly there? Because I think that one's important, especially as we think about how the funnel model is transitioning into like this more flywheel model, because at the end of the day the funnel stopped at the deal being closed, right, and then it was just kind of like this murky water of like, I don't know, the output. So I think that's a handoff that is so important to pay attention to now, especially considering kind of the cyclical growth of relationships. So could you help us unpack like what you've discovered in that particular handoff and any kind of insight you have there?
So just a bit of background. The reason that these handoffs need to go smoothly is because of a concept called time to value, which is like the first time that someone sees success with your product. And so if I just bought this product and I talked to sales and now I have to talk to a service agent to get onboarded, and I have to repeat everything that I just told the sales rep, I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to lose time. Like one, the time to value has gone down. My happiness has gone down as well. So one, having a CRM where I can just transfer notes from the sales agents straight to me. Perfect. And I know, so sales people are so busy and probably don't want to sit and write down the notes, and that's where snippets come in, right? Like just these reusable text blocks that you can use to make everything as easy as possible. And I think on the other end of that, sales reps, some of their best customers are retainers, right? So they need to have a great relationship to know if there are upsell opportunities or what's next. So I think it goes both ways. Both folks need to be in communication.
There's like an overlap there.
I mean, I see that in my role, being in HubSpot services all the time. Like having a good relationship with a, HubSpot sales member is really the difference between, just that time to value. How much is like, oh great, I already know this guy, because the customer's really happy. The customer's really happy with the salesperson. It's like, great. I may not even need to make an intro. It's just like, great, just talk to him. Excellent. Great. About any questions product related,
So to kind of flip it a little bit, another big handoff that there's sort of been question marks about, and I think is getting a lot of attention now is kind of the service to marketing handoff. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? And we've definitely chatted about this in like some of our past conversations, but why is it so important to be paying attention to your service to marketing handoff, especially in this kind of flywheel model world?
Definitely. So if you're not doing anything or even knowing who your delighted customers are, you are missing out on a huge source of a huge opportunity, right? What's the last thing you bought on Amazon?
Oh god.
Is this embarrassing?
No. It's just really weird. So I have a beta fish. Well, I did. He died last night. True story. But okay.
Trying to be positive on this podcast.
I'm just saying.
Jeez.
Anyway, I bought filters, and I think they killed my beta fish.
Oh.
But okay.
That's okay.
Okay, so fish filters.
Fish filters. And before you bought them,
That's why I paused. There was a hesitation.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
before you bought them, what did you look at? What was the most like indicative thing for you to buy them?
The price.
The price. Okay. What else?
So the reviews.
Yes, the reviews, right?
I'm
Nice.
sorry.
Took a while, but we got there.
Yeah, we got there.
Word of mouth referrals, they're the leading lead generation tool that people can use.
Yeah.
I think it's just in everything we do. We look at the price and we look at the reviews. And what are other people saying about this? If
Right.
you are taking advantage of those delighted customers and using an advocacy program or something of the sort, this is my tag phrase, is you're turning your customers into your best marketers.
Right.
I like that tag phrase.
Right?
right.
The trust in marketers and sales folks have dramatically declined. And
It's 3%.
Yeah, okay. I didn't
Like
have
3%
the stat,
of
but
people.
Mm-hmm.
Inbound report.
right.
State of inbound.
I know. Look at who I'm talking to.
Sources.
But when you think about that, like, okay, who else can you tap into to make sure that your brand and your product is top notch and it's on everyone's mind?
Right.
Definitely.
Right.
And especially when it's like anyone can, I say this all the time, but become the loudest voice in the room.
Yeah.
It's so easy for, that to go really well or that to go not really well.
Right.
And how your services team is reacting to those types of reviews is going to impact your business.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So it's also like really important not just to look at the good reviews, but look at the bad reviews too, because those are still
for sure.
public. And so
Yeah, right.
if someone's looking at that and there's no response to a bad review, that's a pretty bad sign. Rather if someone kind of higher up is like, oh, let's fix this, let's get on a call, like that's a good sign. That's telling you that this company cares about their customers.
So I'm going to double down on that a little bit. So could you kind of walk me through the role that's like surveys that you're sending your customer plays in this kind of new flywheel world, and like how this could affect your marketing and sales team and their actions?
Yeah, so when looking at the broader picture of the flywheel, I would focus on NPS. So NPS is your overall big survey that you're sending maybe once in 6 months, once a quarter.
And what does NPS stand for?
Net Promoter Score.
Okay.
Ta-da.
And the question that is asked, it's one question, it's how likely are you to recommend our product or service to a friend or colleague? And it's a 0 to 10 point scale. So the first thing that I would do is make sure you're sending those out at least once every 6 months.
Okay.
When they start to trickle back in, make a list in your CRM or whatever you're using to highlight the folks who are in that 9 to 10 range. So the folks who give you a 9 to 10, those are the folks who are going to bang the table and like scream your name. Those are the happy folks.
Right.
And first, thank them. Say like, hey, thanks for giving us such a good review. Like maybe send them some free swag. Just like butter them up, because what you're asking for them is maybe some tweets about your company or how they helped you. Maybe a blog post. You can write a case study about them. And this is going to be good for their brand as well, since they're getting more recognition.
Totally.
Yeah. Adriti, I did want to ask, you were saying that it's necessary to send an NPS every 6 months to your customers. What if, I'm just thinking, because a lot of customers that I talk to don't necessarily sell a recurring service. They're selling a widget. It may be just a one-time purchase. Does it really make sense to send something like that 6 months after they purchased? And why? If so, or if not?
Yeah, I think it is. One, again, for that intersection between service and marketing, right? Like, you can still use those reviews to get other people in the door.
Right.
Two, and it depends on the product. If this is something that they would need, like, in the future,
Totally.
it's good to kind of keep in contact with them.
And what I've seen a lot too is that's where like the timeliness of the NPS
Definitely.
I think to kind of build off your point, Adriti, it's like at least once every 6 months, but you could do it much sooner than 6 months. I think what I've seen a lot is usually around, and maybe this is just like my anecdotal data, but around like a week or two after I've bought something from a company, I've usually seen one come in where it's like, tell us about your experience, rate the product. In those kind of emails, I think some of them might be marketing emails, but always making sure that you're kind of capturing those experiences, especially after the user has also had enough time to potentially find value. So recently I bought like a sports jacket off an unnamed sports jacket site, and they waited about like a week and a half, so like realistically I could have used this product by then to give like an honest, fair review about not only just like my e-commerce experience with them, but also just like the product itself. So I think it's, while there is that like once every 6 months, also think about like when your user or your customer is most likely to have derived value from your product. And I think that can sort of differ product to product.
And there are also other surveys too.
Right,
like
totally.
you don't have to just use NPS if you want to.
That's a big one.
Yeah, MPS is a predominant one I've seen.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess if you want to, if someone calls into your support team, sending a survey right after that.
Yep.
How was the sales process? Something like that to test on different things if it's not like a subscription or anything.
Right.
And I think the biggest thing also is, so of course, to build an advocacy program, you want to see who your happy folks are, but you also want to talk to the folks who are giving you like 2s or 3s, figuring out how you can maybe get them not to be your like promoters, but just get them in a place where they're happy with you.
And then they're not like shouting that your product is awful.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Because people are likely to do that too.
And in that case, like maybe it's even better to part if the expectations weren't right, like sometimes like it doesn't work out,
or at least find out why.
Yeah,
or at least find out why.
Absolutely.
And see if you can alleviate it. I mean, that's from our perspective. I feel like what we do look at when we do get something that's a detractor, to use the MPS methodology or terminology. Okay. Hey, what don't you like?
Yep.
Right.
What's going on? Can we do anything to help you out?
Yeah.
At least.
And to kind of drill down into also just another handoff, as we're talking about kind of detractors, is that's where a lot of like your social listening and like social mentions come in, especially as a marketer thinking about like the marketing to sales handoff, but also kind of the full life cycle. Because where you might find that some of your customers might not be answering these surveys, or there is like some drop off in that action, but if people are turning to social media and using that as kind of the channel to have that word of mouth influence, that's also a good kind of counterpoint, having those internal surveys, but then using kind of social media listening to be that kind of external, more organic listening to make sure that you're always hearing the voice of the customer.
I think that also was in that State of Inbound report where they were talking about, people are more willing to share their opinions on social media. Great, I'm going to just go on Twitter and say how great this is or how awful this is experience. I'll go on LinkedIn, I'll go on Facebook, I'll go to Instagram, whatever other channels or mediums you can think of.
Yeah.
Right? People are more willing to do that now.
The social space is actually an interesting one in terms of like service these days too, because I know like HubSpot, for example, has like the HubSpot support, it's like its own account separate from like the rest of the HubSpot like marketing, like Twitters and Instagrams, and I do social media. But that's so interesting too, because it's like it's a direct lifeline to the voice of the customer, and like how well you're meeting the expectation, not just in your marketing content, but like with your sales experience, with your customer support. And I know that, or services, or with your services agents. And I know that is an active Twitter where people are just tweeting at HubSpot support. So I think it's another interesting way that, not just like as a channel, but to really keep your ear to the ground, is that a phrase? And really listen to your customer.
Yeah, and it's also, that just goes to show that customers want to reach out wherever, whenever, they're not going to always pick up the phone and call someone, right? Like it's whatever's closest to them, and you as a company better be monitoring that space.
Yeah, right.
Totally.
Can we come back to the customer journey mapping again?
Yeah.
Because we talked about it, and I want to just kind of give people a audio representation of just what it is.
Yeah.
I like I said, and I keep on referencing this webinar, but it was great because you guys actually really mapped it out. So Adriti, it would be great if you could just like talk through it of just saying, great, if I'm trying to map out my customers in the context of my flywheel, what do I need to write out? What do I need to know?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this before. The first is, one, getting all of the appropriate people in a room.
Yep.
Service, marketing, sales. You need to make sure that your buyer persona, everyone's on the same page with who your buyer persona is. So who is that person you're mapping out? And the goal of the business. What are you trying to get this customer to do? Next, this is like the bulk of it, is mapping out what someone thinks, feels, and does. Yeah. And this is really to build empathy. And this also comes, especially if you have so many different folks in the room, this is going to lead to great discussions, because there's bound to be some either like, oh, what? I didn't know that at all. Or like, no, that's not what I think, because if you're looking at it through touch points, you're not looking at it through the journey. So getting everyone together, I think, will lead to good discussion. And the actual, like the thinking and feeling and doing is something that I hadn't thought about before the webinar, actually. I always thought it's like, okay, they do this, this, and this. But when you really understand...
It's easy to think about it in terms of actions. What are they doing? Because that's how we're like sort of conditioned to think about it, because we think about our part in that. So the marketer thinks about the blog post. Oh, they're clicking the CTA at the bottom of the blog post. The sales rep thinks about like the phone call. Oh, they're calling in. Yeah. Maybe the services team thinks about, oh, I do the web tickets, so they're emailing. So it's easy, I feel like, for us to put ourselves in our customers' shoes, because we're inherently trying to influence their actions. But it's that thinking and feeling that I feel like that insight really is helpful.
And it also prevents us from thinking in silos, the thinking and feeling. Of just saying, well, I can't just think of, to use your examples, I can't just think about when they're going to pick up the phone. Yeah. Or at least from a services perspective, when they're going to book a meeting with me. Right. Or when they're going to click on the CTA. Right. I need to think about, great, what do they do before and after?
Yes.
And beyond that. Definitely. Right. Not just those two.
Yeah. And what I think is really interesting about the customer journey map is like, so it's essentially a matrix, and I love that it's kind of so flexible to whatever type of exercise you want to do. So you have on your rows, if you will, of your matrix, you have that thinking, feeling, doing. And then, I know I have it in front of me. And then in your columns, you can do it, Adriti and I did it in terms of the buyer's journey. The awareness, you can have your columns be like the awareness, consideration and decision stage, but you can also do it in terms of attract, engage, delight. And it's kind of whatever exercise you find the most impactful at the time. But again, you do just want to keep it to one buyer persona, because then even if you're doing sticky notes, even if you're using color coding, it can get...
It's a mess.
It's a mess, you know, and it might be something that you want to keep in the future, just like on a wall, depending on your office space, or maybe have like a more virtual setting where you have this kind of saved. But the flexibility of it is it really just puts you in that person's shoes.
And you can visually see what's the pain point, like where is there a dip in this, or where are like everyone's really happy, like it's just everyone's in charge of the customer experience, so like having everyone on that same page is really helpful.
And an important point here too is that much like your buyer, so you start with your buyer persona, right? And if you're just new starting out, this might be based on educated guesses, right? You might just be like, ideally, who is your buyer persona? But over time, you're going to start collecting more data on who these people are, what actions they're taking, what's actually driving them, what type of content is interesting to them. And the customer journey map is much of the same way. Like this might start feeling like a lot of guesswork, especially if you're starting out, especially if you're not collecting the right data to identify what the pain points are. But over time, so at first it might just be like, I don't know, this is like highly theoretical. This is what we think these pain points are. But over time, as you start again collecting data on those touch points, on those kind of leaky chevrons, the handoffs. I don't know. But yeah, like as you start to gather data on like how well are these handoffs going?
Yeah.
Right.
You have surveys in there. How well is this experience going? That's when you can start to be very, very specific with the types of efficiencies and like the types of updates to your process. So at first, I think it's important to remember that the first iteration of this exercise, it might feel like a lot of guesswork, but over time, once you start to see what gaps, like if there is anything that you don't know in the course of their journey, whether it's the buyer's journey or throughout the inbound methodology, write it down. Find that data. If you aren't tracking that data, put the systems in place so that you're tracking the data. Because over time, this is an exercise that should inherently become more data driven. So by the time you have the people in the room, your marketing, your sales, your services team, they're bringing data to the table and they're saying, hey, this is what we've noticed. These are our like health checks. This is what we're noticing in our traffic, to the conversion to the leads, to the conversion to like the sales qualified leads, et cetera, et cetera. So that it starts to be more concrete, more data driven,
Again,
more
it's
specific.
And again, it's identifying this is where we're getting it right in our business model. This is where we're getting it wrong.
Yep.
Coming back to that mapping your flow.
And it's also, what's the impact of us getting it wrong?
Yep.
Like, what is this
Yeah.
causing?
Or
to go
right.
on? Or right.
Or
yeah,
right,
exactly.
yeah. If you want to look at it the positive way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Glass half full. I'm glass half full kind of guy. So,
Glass empty.
but no. But that's absolutely right. Like, what is that impact? And I guess that's an easy way, you know, to really emphasize of getting the appropriate people in a room, which I really liked of that first part of the process, because so many times, at least, I've heard customers say, you know, when talking about, let's say, sales marketing alignment, or we're talking about sales marketing service alignment.
There's not like a fancy term for it.
Yeah.
There isn't. I'll just say alignment overall, everywhere.
Business alignment.
Yeah, just everywhere alignment. You know, did everybody come in the room? Oh, no, you know, this person was missing, this person was missing. It's like, well, we need to get them in the room.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
We're missing a perspective.
you're missing a perspective. Yeah.
That's the first step.
Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. So, so to go back to kind of the flywheel and kind of using this, so do you have any examples of issues that you've seen between teams in your like research, or based on some of the content that you've produced specifically?
So the biggest thing, and I think you can attest to this, is sales not talking to services.
Interesting. Okay.
Sure.
And it's just people are busy.
I think it's habit.
It's habit.
Yeah.
It's also, and I think the mentality is like, okay, close the deal. It's still the funnel mentality. Close the deal, on to the next folks. Like, who's marketing bringing to me? So I think if they can align those folks more.
Okay. So to help bridge that gap, so I know that there's this thing called like the inbound service framework.
Yeah.
Help us step into the shoes of, because I really do feel like services is this missing puzzle piece that we're like kind of trying to bring into the fold, and it's so nebulous right now, because I truly feel that like marketing and sales teams just like have been disconnected from just based on kind of how I've interacted with customers, also having been a former support rep. There is this disconnect. So can you walk us through, like, in this modern world where there is this marketing, sales, and service team, what inbound service really looks like, and how those two teams, marketing and sales, can better align with that kind of mentality? Because being an inbound service rep is more than just being like available.
For sure.
Right. So what does it mean to be an inbound service agent?
Yeah, so the framework, or EGG, as you will.
Egg.
Engage, guide, grow.
Okay.
So engage, this is the wherever, whenever. As you mentioned, people are tweeting in their questions. People want to chat in. Like, it's not just a phone call. It's not just an email anymore. So the first step is engaging wherever, whenever.
Okay.
Then guide. So a lot of folks, again, they want to be proactive and they want to be in charge of their own solutions. So want to
These
guide
are empowered buyers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, no one wants to talk on the phone.
Yeah. No one's gonna wait around.
Yeah.
They'll just return it.
So guiding is guiding to proactive solutions to make sure that your customers are finding success on their own. They're not relying on anyone.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the last is growing. So you want to know one, if your customers are growing, this is through those feedback surveys.
Yep.
And if they are, how can our company grow with our customers and make sure that we are aligning with them and giving them what they need at every stage.
Right. Or growing better.
Cool.
See what I did there?
I like that.
See what I did there?
And I think that's so important too, because one of the things that you'll see kind of sprinkled throughout flywheel content is this idea that like Force is very much like an investment in your business, but in essence, it's actually more of an investment in your customer and the success of your customer over time, which is why I love that the inbound service framework kind of ends in that grow phase, because ultimately that's what's going to power a significant portion of people's flywheels, right? It's just like, it's not just that you're doing things right and that you're building a relationship. In order to get the people to slam the table and say, this product was amazing, this company is someone I stand behind, you have to be helping them be successful in whatever kind of roadblock or goal that they're facing. So even if it's something as simple as like a sports jacket, you know, like how is that company empowering me to have a great experience, but also provide a product that is like helping me accomplish whatever it seems like I'm setting out to do.
And all of a sudden you've got data points now to show it.
Exactly.
And say like, hey, you know, we got X number of good reviews and Y number of bad reviews.
Totally.
This is how it quantifies. And Adriti just kind of state again what you said. This is the impact if we can improve it, that ratio.
And that data is so important for marketers. I think it's easy to see in terms of like reviews, because then you can build that advocacy program. But even for sales reps, you know, like we talked about in the last episode, this kind of concept of clawbacks where like your commission can be taken away. But also just like this idea of like overall like revenue driven, like how much are you succeeding in reoccurring revenue, or kind of continuing to bring in those leads for those cross-sell opportunities, building that relationship so it's that much easier to talk to those customers in the future. So it's not just data that's important for the service rep because they're measured on it, because that happens to be their metric, but also think about like how your other teams can use that to then inform and be data driven about their own initiatives. And in the case of marketing, it might be customer marketing, but in the case and in the case of sales, it might be reflective on like how successful certain techniques were in the long run. So it might be the same data point unlocking different areas of insight, but it's important for everyone to kind of consider how this data affects their own processes.
Definitely.
Awesome. So in terms of goals, let's talk about goals for a second. So I know that sometimes it feels like, because technically service comes at the end of a relationship with a customer, it can kind of feel like sometimes their goals are highly dependent on that set by sales and service. But do you have any recommendations in terms of how services can start to enter in those conversations earlier, before marketing is setting their goals, before sales is setting their goals? Because again, customer service should be proactive in some ways, not just reactive.
Right. So any ideas about like the metrics that service?
Yeah, should be like talking to marketing from the get-go. Metrics that they should be talking to sales from the get-go.
Yeah. Let me think about that one.
No problem. I think NPS is a big one, right? Because I think NPS,
it's a key metric.
It's a key
like
metric.
At least
a health
from
check metric. Yeah, it's like how happy your customers are.
Right.
And I think also if you are in a business that has upsell or cross-sell, like making sure that sales is talking to services up front and saying like, hey, there's opportunity here, just keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Because I know that we were measured on like cross-sell or upsell opportunities as well.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to consider, one thing that we haven't really talked about as much is knowledge base, like this concept of having a knowledge base. And I think that's an interesting intersection between, you know, your services content and how it directly impacts marketing. So like how many page views your certain like frequently asked questions are getting, how marketing can be proactive and starting to surface some of that content early on.
This is where we can use bots, right?
Yes.
Where like how many conversations are these bots having, and how does that affect ticket deflection, so your customer support reps don't have to to answer
address
these.
it
Exactly.
because it's simple enough for a bot, or at least it's straightforward enough for a bot to answer
Yeah.
or address it.
And I mean, this is where your marketing team comes in too, right?
Right.
If everyone's tweeting you questions, maybe
Yeah.
your marketing team goes to support and say, hey, maybe we need a knowledge base about this
Yep.
article or
Yep.
this problem.
Yep.
Bots. Oh, bots. Let's talk about bots.
boy.
So tell me about bots and inbound service.
All of them?
All
Just
of them.
everything.
So what have you seen in terms of how effective bots can be because I know that there's this empowered buyer, they're looking for questions.
Yep.
But where do you see bots fitting into this kind of new idea of inbound?
I think, I mean, as I've mentioned so many times, people want answers quickly. They don't
Yeah.
care how they get the answers. And if a bot can surface up knowledge base articles probably quicker than a human can,
Yeah.
heck yeah, we need to use those.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
I think bots, I'm not sure if this is quite in the service realm, but there's an interesting relationship between bots and forms.
Yes.
And
I love
like-
that. Good tee up.
Thank you.
Because, okay, so I deal with some of the conversion tools, right?
Oh, there you go.
Forms are in my wheelhouse, if you will. And something that I've been told since the day I joined Academy is forms are dead. Forms are dead and bots are alive. However, I think there's an interesting case to be made about time and place, right? Like,
Yeah.
when is it more helpful to have a form? And when is it more helpful in the buyer's journey throughout attracting, engaging, delighting, throughout the inbound methodology, or your own customized flywheel, to have kind of proactive answers versus kind of reactive service. And I think that's such an interesting one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if forms are dead. I think it probably depends on your personas and
Definitely.
that sort of thing. But I think it's worth A/B testing.
Absolutely. And, there are there's chat flows, sort of, right? So can you walk us through what the chat flow is?
Yeah. So this is a lot with like either marketing or sales, but it's basically figuring out if you're like a good fit by saying, okay, what's your name? How many people are in your business? What's your major concern?
Yeah.
And through that, you'll be like, okay, well, here are some articles.
Totally.
Here are, a meetings link if you want to talk to someone more, but just giving your sales reps or your marketing reps a little more information so you're not going into these meetings blind.
So it's interesting to me because it qualifies like a form, but it feels like
does.
a conversation.
You're
so
still
there's like
collecting.
this hybrid experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're still collecting. I just heard there in that example 3 data points,
Yep.
right? Name, company size, pain point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
Before.
so common
Yeah,
when you see them. Totally.
almost accelerating the kind of the flywheel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, this is assuming, and I think this is the problem here in that question between forms versus bots.
Yeah.
Of like understanding your buyer persona, as you were saying.
Yeah,
Adriti.
totally.
Like maybe a buyer persona wouldn't want a bot.
Yeah,
For sure.
And also
Depending on what
where
they're
they are,
buying,
like
what your
that's where
company is.
customer journey mapping is so important, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
it's also going to be dependent on like the type of expectations you've set, where in their experience they are, and what's better suited to kind of align with their needs. Like because
Right.
if they're just trying to subscribe to your blog, chances are they don't want to have a long conversation about it.
Right.
They just want to subscribe to your blog. They know that awesome content is headed your way. But if they do, like, they need that question quickly, like, they're not going to want to fill out a form and like wait 24 hours or whoever knows how long for a service rep to be like, hey, this article solves for your needs. Like,
Right.
that's a bad experience.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
a bad
No, yeah.
experience.
And it's very convoluted too.
Right,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
very
Because it's just like,
convoluted.
I don't know, I just like have this question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being very critical about like what experience you're trying to provide, what expectation your buyer persona probably has at that stage, and what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to do is also really important there. I get that all the time. Forms are always a beast in terms of just
Yeah.
like bots, but they're also like at war with this new topic cluster methodology.
Oh.
More content coming soon.
But also, I mean, that's where thinking and feeling come in.
Totally.
Yeah.
And kind of the trust that you're inspiring at every stage, whether that's attract, engage, delight, or as a marketer, like awareness, consideration, and decision. Because, sometimes a form is going to be abrasive. Sometimes it is going to be exactly what you need.
Right. Yeah. This is great. I mean, I'm kind of sitting here taking notes. It's probably that's what the mic can hear, at least on this episode.
Tap, tap, tap.
Me just tapping on and typing more notes in. As we're kind of coming to the conclusion a little bit, we're just thinking of takeaways for our viewers, our listeners. Sorry.
Both.
We do have, or we will have an asset in the blog post, kind of mapping out for you to map out your customer journey. And that is something that Jorie and I can also provide feedback on if you want to email us at our alias, inboundreporting@hubspot.com.
Said it today.
She said she made it. Yeah, she did make it.
I went right to IT.
And just like the last episode where we wanted our viewers and or listeners to also map out their flywheel, we would love people to also start thinking about mapping out a customer's journey.
Absolutely.
Because this, I think the big takeaways that I got from this is that both parts of mapping your flywheel, if we're splitting it into different episodes, really give you a sense of, understanding your business model, this is how we actually act, here's the forces and friction, here's what's working, here's what's not.
Yeah.
And then also, what data points do we already know and what do we need to collect that's related to eventually that next stage, which is defining your goals.
And I think the way that we split it up too is also indicative of there's the flywheel, which is very much your internal focus, right? This is what your business is doing to support your customer. Your customer journey map is what they're experiencing. That's that external focus. How does what you're doing with your flywheel translate into customer experience? And is that effective? And if not, what can you do identifying that force and friction to then kind of flex with your customer and improve it? And if there are these gaps in what you know or don't know, how are you then leveraging the tools at your disposal, whether that's surveys, whether that's social listening, to really get into the mind. If you were struggling to get into the mind of your customer, then you can map your flywheel, but you're going to miss a critical perspective and data point in and of itself.
Right.
Which is why these exercises are so important.
So would you folks suggest mapping your flywheel first or your customer journey first?
So I think it's important to do them sort of in tandem. I would start with the flywheel because I think this focuses on those handoffs, and understanding the key concepts of force and friction is helpful to do. So I would recommend flywheel first, understanding what's happening with your business, and then this as a follow-up exercise, understanding what's happening with your customer and seeing how they kind of relate to each other.
And how they can change,
How they can change, exactly. Again, it's not something that's carved into stone. And it is something that as you get more data, as your business kind of flexes and grows and scales and becomes more effective, it is going to evolve over time, which is why I think customer journey mapping is so important to do over and over again. It's not kind of one and done. I think that's been a myth about buyer personas that has persisted, where it's just nope, that's my buyer persona. I did it for the marketing software certain word. And it's no.
Keep going.
This needs to, because it's you're going to gather more data about who these people are. And if you're not updating how you're approaching creating content, creating experiences for these people, then that's only as useful as those initial words.
Right. And it's not static.
No.
It is going to be, as you were saying, I do need to emphasize that again.
Yeah.
It is an evolving document exercise.
So based on your experience, Nakul, how often do you recommend people go back to their buyer personas? Does it depend industry to industry? Does it depend on how big they are?
I would say it depends industry to industry.
Okay.
I do typically like to see, at least something once or twice a year, for them to rotate, because it could be the case of your first, maybe you have, for example, 2 buyer personas, maybe you need to add another one.
Yeah.
It may not be the case of changing one. It may be the case of going back and changing one.
Yeah.
But at least in I would say my, limited experience, at least from a HubSpot vantage point, it is the case of if you're trying to collect data points and you're not really making progress on your goals, which again, we're going to talk about next episodes.
Yeah.
There is then a lack of data that you're not collecting. Is it something that as a result you don't understand your customers?
Yeah.
Looks like it's customer journey mapping exercise.
Definitely.
Is it something of the case that you also don't understand your flywheel? Maybe it's the case of customer journey mapping and your flywheel mapping. you're not getting it done
Yeah,
right.
everything's connected.
Yeah.
It reminds me sort of like, so when I was in support, I joined HubSpot about 3 years ago, and I remember there being this kind of great upheaval because we were working with more customers, sending out more surveys, getting more data, and we actually had, after analyzing, I say we, HubSpot, higher ups than me as a support rep, had identified that actually like a cohort of people that they had been considering the same persona was actually split. And it was our designer and kind of developer personas at that point kind of calling into support. But up until that point, they didn't have the data to differentiate them. They weren't collecting the right types of feedback to see them as anything other than one single persona.
Right.
And so it caused this kind of massive upheaval. People were sort of scrambling because we had always assumed, oh no, that's just one persona, until we started to dig into the data, gather more
It's
data.
another guy. There's another guy. There's
Exactly.
another guy. Yep.
So
Yep.
it's interesting kind of because you want to
Yep.
make sure that you're also catering experiences to each of your personas, and you don't want kind of these silent personas that have very different goals, wants, thinking, feeling, doing different things
Right.
to kind of slip to the wayside because those are your customers.
Yep.
Right? Those are potential buyers
Yep.
that you could be missing out or just not providing like the greatest experience for because of assumptions you're making that no, we got it the first time. Chances are, if you did, great, that's
Yep.
awesome. But how much of the true story did you get the first time by guesswork?
Yeah, and again, to relate back to your initial question, it's not the case of like, you don't necessarily have to make a change every single time.
Yeah,
It may be the case where you actually have done it right.
yeah, and it's like great.
And if
this
that's
is still working.
that's
Yep.
the case, it's great. There is a need though, as you asked in your question, there is a need to review it.
Absolutely.
You know, just like you would review, you know, how are things going in your flywheel, how are things going in your customer journey mapping. There is a need to review it because if you be complacent, then you're kind of missing out on data points that you could actually use later.
And could be actioning.
process, yeah.
So I think that to kind of correspond with that, maybe every time you review your persona, set a goal to also run this exercise. And I
Yeah.
think
Yep.
kind of once or twice a year can help you align, like, are we providing the best customer experience? Are we not? How can our teams better align? And maybe that's something that happens kind of between managers, between VPs. It's kind of dependent on your company, but should be happening kind of consistently to make sure that you're empathizing and aligning with your customer.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, great. I think I've got a lot of notes. Again, I'm sorry, I've been tapping and
good.
tapping along. But we got a couple of things. Definitely Adriti's lesson on sales and customer success handoff, as she was saying. Definitely the webinar that you both did on customer journey mapping. I think that was really good. The state of inbound report, some initial materials on NPS, and as well as the inbound service framework.
Definitely.
And again, as a follow-up, guys, we will be having like a similar attachment that you may have seen on the webinar. We will definitely want to give you feedback on how you do your customer journey mapping. Send it to us, email us. We'd love to give you some thoughts and help you guys progress.
Awesome. So I think that's it for this particular episode.
Thanks,
so
Adriti.
thank you so
Yeah,
much for
of course.
joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And next episode, we're going to talk about
Goals.
setting effective goals.
So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, thanks.